Every weight loss diet that works does so for one reason, a calorie deficit. Question is, how do you actually set one up and stick to it? And what mistakes are you making that are preventing you from losing body fat? I'm Dr. Joey, Nutrition Sciences Ph.D. and founder of Fit for Life Academy. And my team and I have helped hundreds of busy professionals lose fat by mastering their calories, without having to follow extreme diets or give up their favorite foods. In this video, we're going to cover exactly how the science of fat loss works, how to set up your calories and macros to help you lose fat effectively, and practical strategies to stay on track long term, even when life gets crazy. Let's start off by talking about what a calorie is in the first place, and how to set up an appropriate calorie deficit. So this term calories, it gets thrown around a lot, right? And a lot of people don't really even understand what a calorie is. By definition, a calorie is simply a unit of measurement, okay? It's a unit of measurement for energy. The same way that something like a pound or a kilogram is a unit of measurement for mass, and a meter or a mile is a unit of measurement for distance, a calorie is simply a unit of measurement for energy. Okay, and there are other units of measurements for energy. You might have heard of things like kilojoules or joules or watts. These are all different units of measurements for energy. So calories aren't a tangible physical thing. They are simply a unit of measurement. It's the way we measure how much energy is in a particular food. So how do our bodies use calories in the first place? Well, when we eat food, food is digested into its individual components, which are what we call macronutrients for the most part, right? Because the macronutrients, protein, carbs, and fats, are the nutrients in food that contain calories. They have energy. Now, our body doesn't use the proteins, carbs, and fats directly for energy. Our body turns those things through different physiological processes into something called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. I want you to think about ATP as the energy currency of our body. The same way that in the US we use the US dollar to buy stuff, our bodies use ATP to make stuff happen. So ATP goes through a process known as hydrolysis, and I mentioned earlier that ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. So it's a molecule of adenosine attached to 3 phosphates. And when we hydrolyze ATP, we release one of those phosphates. Okay, so now we have ADP, or adenosine diphosphate, and a free phosphate, which was that third one. And it's this hydrolysis process that helps fuel reactions in the body that makes things occur. For example, when ATP is hydrolyzed, that free phosphate group binds to myosin, which is one of the contractile proteins in muscle, and helps muscle actually contract. So that's one way that this hydrolysis process helps fuel muscle contraction. We also have different sort of pumps in our cells that allow different ions to come into cells or out of cells. You might have heard of something like the sodium potassium pump. And some of these pumps are essentially just proteins, and they change shape to allow different things to come in and out. So different ions, different molecules have specific shapes, and the pumps, when they're open, they have a particular conformation or shape that allows things to come in or out, and when they're closed, they have a different shape that essentially doesn't let things to come in or out of the cell. And the conformation or the shape of the pump is typically influenced by ATP, right? So when ATP is hydrolyzed, it would essentially cause a change in the conformation or shape of a protein pump to allow different ions to come in and out. So these are just a couple of ways how this hydrolysis process of ATP helps fuel reactions and makes things happen inside the body. I know it's complicated, but it's just an easy snapshot, or a simple snapshot of why we consume food, or how we consume food, I should say. Break it down into individual macronutrients. Those macronutrients can be used to produce ATP, and then ATP is what we use to fuel different reactions. And ATP, when you hydrolyze it, produces heat, and there's also energy in the chemical bonds themselves, and that's what we're measuring when we measure the amount of calories in a particular food. And in general, our body uses ATP and calories for 3 main physiological functions, okay? One is to maintain our basal metabolic rate, and that takes about 60 to 70% of the calories that we burn any given day. And this is simply the amount of energy that your body needs at rest to keep you alive. So things like breathing, keeping your organs functioning correctly, maintaining your core body temperature, etc. We also burn 20 to 30% of calories through physical activity. Sometimes people break this down into exercise and NEAT. NEAT being non-exercise activity thermogenesis, so just moving around throughout the day, not intentional exercise. But you can group both of those, exercise and NEAT, into just physical activity, which is any sort of movement, right? Walking, exercising, lifting weights, but even me just here talking, moving my lips, fidgeting, blinking, those would all fall under physical activity. And then lastly, the third category is the thermic effect of food, which typically makes up about 10% of the calories that we burn on any given day, because we actually require calories to break down, digest, and metabolize food. Okay, and that accounts for about 10% of the calories that you burn on any given day. Now, the next thing to talk about is how do these processes contribute to weight gain or weight loss? Now, our bodies have the ability to store energy, aka calories, and they can do so in two main ways. First, we can store energy as glycogen. So glycogen is the way that our bodies store glucose in the muscle and the liver. However, we don't have an unlimited storage of glycogen, right? There's a cap. So once our glycogen stores are full, the excess energy can also be stored as adipose tissue, aka fat. And this is a big evolutionary advantage. In today's world, we have access to food year-round. We don't really go through famines, right? But several hundred years ago, I don't know the exact number of years, but back in the past, we didn't have food year-round, right? We would go through periods of famine where we didn't have access to food. So the ability to actually store energy during periods of time where you had an abundance of food was a big evolutionary advantage, because we were able to store that food as fat and then use that fat for fuel during periods when we didn't have as much access to food. Now, it's important to understand that your body burns or goes through a certain amount of energy every day. And again, that contributes to the three variables that I mentioned earlier: your BMR, the thermic effect of food, and physical activity. We burn a certain amount of calories every single day. And this whole concept of energy balance is pretty simple when you understand this. If you eat more calories than your body burns, that net difference, the excess, gets stored, again, as glycogen and as fat. This is what we call being in a calorie surplus. And if you eat less calories than your body burns, then the difference, you still need to get it from somewhere, so your body gets it from your stored body fat. And this is what we call being in a calorie deficit. For example, if your body burns 2,500 calories on any given day and you only eat 2,000 calories, you still need to get those 500 calories from somewhere, and your body is going to get it from stored sources. Again, mainly body fat, but glycogen as well. You can sometimes break down muscle and get energy from other tissues, but mainly you're getting the excess energy that your body needs from the fat tissue. So again, weight gain means you're in a calorie surplus. Weight loss means you're in a calorie deficit. Any diet, every single diet that results in weight loss does so because you are in a calorie deficit. Keto, paleo, carnivore, vegan, fasting, South Beach, Atkins, you name it. If you've ever gone on one of these diets and you've lost weight, it's not because of some unique property of the diet that results in weight loss. It's because you were in a calorie deficit. And it's an important concept to understand, because sometimes people think that it's the specific foods that you eat that help you lose weight or gain weight, and you have to eat healthy to lose weight. And while it is important to make healthy food choices, because our foods can influence things like the calories that we consume. For example, some foods help you stay full, so it's easier to eat less calories. Other foods have a greater thermic effect, so you burn more calories. At the end of the day, it doesn't come down to just the specific foods. It comes down to how those foods impact energy balance, and you have to be in a calorie deficit for weight loss. And there are so many misconceptions about this concept. I hear people say things like this all the time. I'm in a calorie deficit, but I'm not losing weight. It's not just about calories. It's about hormones. Eating healthy is what matters, not calories. And the truth is that there is like a little bit of truth to some of these messages, but it's missing the point, because calories, or energy balance, I should say, takes all of these variables into account. For example, when people say I'm in a deficit and I'm not losing weight, they are typically referring to the fact that they're not eating a lot of food, they're eating low calories, and they're not losing weight. But people need to understand that being in a calorie deficit is not a specific number of calories. Just because you put your numbers or your stats into some equation or calculator and it told you should eat 1,500 calories to lose weight, and you eat 1,500 calories and you're not losing weight, by definition, you are not in a calorie deficit. Yes, you may be eating low calories, but you are not in a deficit, meaning that the calories that you burn are also probably pretty low, right? If you're eating 1,500 calories and you're not losing weight, that means that your body's only really burning about 1,500 calories per day. Now, I also hear people talk about hormones a lot, right? Insulin, your thyroid hormone, this hormone, that hormone, and it's about the hormones that impact weight loss, not calories. And that's not necessarily true, because sometimes hormones do play a role, but they play a role because they influence energy balance. For example, our thyroid hormone influences our basal metabolic rate. If you have hypothyroidism and you don't produce sufficient T3 or T4, you're going to have a low basal metabolic rate, so you're going to have low energy expenditure. Other hormones can impact hunger regulation, so they might cause you to eat more. Other hormones may impact the amount of muscle that you have, which impacts your basal metabolic rate. So hormones do matter, but they matter because they impact both sides of the equation, calories in and calories out. Okay, now that we have an understanding of what calories are, the concept of energy balance, and the importance of being in a calorie deficit for fat loss, let's talk about how to set up a sustainable calorie deficit to help you lose body fat. Step one, the first thing we need to figure out is what your maintenance calories are, which by definition is simply the amount of calories that you need in order to maintain your body weight. Remember earlier we were talking about your total daily energy expenditure, aka how many calories you burn on any given day. That is essentially synonymous with your maintenance calories. Because if you eat the same number of calories that your body burns, you are going to be maintaining your body weight by definition. There are three main methods that you can use to calculate your total daily energy expenditure, and one isn't necessarily better than the other, although the third one is my favorite, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. The first one is to just use an online calculator. There are so many online calculators to help you estimate your total daily energy expenditure. If you simply type into Google TDEE calculator, that's TDEE for total daily energy expenditure, you will have dozens of links to different calculators. They're all pretty similar. You can just click on one, input your stats. It'll ask you for things like your weight, your height, your gender, your level of physical activity, your body fat percentage, and then based off of those metrics, it'll spit out a number that'll be an estimate of where your total daily energy expenditure should be, right? That is method number one. Method number two, which is a little bit simpler, is just to multiply your body weight by an activity factor, okay? And by the way, guys, none of these are perfect. They're just a starting point, and I'll explain that in a second. If you're somebody who is completely sedentary, right? You don't really exercise much, you don't really move around much, you have a sedentary job, multiply your body weight by 11 to 12, and that will give you a rough estimate of what your TDEE should be. So for example, I weigh 220 pounds, but for ease of math, as I'm going to be doing some mental math here, let's just say I weigh 200 pounds, multiply that by 11, that would be what, like 2,200 calories, so roughly around there, right? If you are moderately active, multiply your body weight by 14 to 16. This is somebody who works out multiple times per day, probably gets, 7,000, 8,000 steps in per day, but you still have a pretty sedentary job, so you're not extremely active. And if you are somebody who is extremely active, this means you work out probably 6-7 times a week. On top of that, your job is super active, you're moving the majority of the day, multiply your body weight by 18 to 20, and that will give you a rough estimate of what your TDE is, okay? Now, as I mentioned earlier, these are just estimates. They are not perfect. They are just a starting point, which means that you need to start somewhere and adjust over time, which is why this third method is actually my favorite, because it's a direct measurement. So rather than using a calculator or multiplying your body weight by a certain number, just track your calories for 2 weeks. Okay, so if you simply just track your calories for 2 weeks and you track your body weight and your body weight stays pretty stable, then by definition, that is your maintenance calories. Okay, so if I weigh 220 pounds and I start eating 2,500 calories, let's say I don't change my eating behaviors at all, I just start tracking my calories, and over 2 weeks, my weight is the same, then I know that my maintenance calories is 2,500 calories per day. Not that complicated, right? This is the slowest method, but I think it's the most accurate method, and it's just a super simple way to determine what your maintenance calories are. Now, after you figure out what your maintenance calories are, you need to adjust them to be in a deficit. Obviously, we need to decrease calories below our maintenance in order to start losing weight. But the question is, how much should you reduce your calories by? And the truth is that you can go into a deficit that's really small that results in slow weight loss, or you can go into a really large deficit that results in a lot of weight loss. And which one you should go into depends on a number of factors. So let's go ahead and talk about that. First and foremost, a slow weight loss or a slow deficit would be somewhere between 10 to 15% below maintenance. So let's say my maintenance calories are 3,000 calories per day. If I drop 10 to 15% below that, I'm roughly going to be at 2,500 to 2,700 calories per day in general. I would recommend this for those of you that are complete beginners to dieting and fat loss, because it's going to be way more sustainable. You should also be focusing on other healthy dietary habits, things that I talk about frequently, like protein intake, fiber intake, a fruit and vegetable goal. You should be working on improving your lifestyle as well, walking more. So you don't want to go into super drastic deficit that feels really hard to maintain in the first place. So if you are newer to this whole health and fitness stuff, or maybe you're even newer to trying to lose weight in a healthy and sustainable way, you've been following crash diets before and they didn't stick. One of the reasons why they probably didn't stick is because you were dieting way too hard, slashing your food intake way too much, and it's better to take a slow and controlled approach. I would also recommend being in a slight deficit for people who don't have a lot of fat to lose. Maybe you want to lose 5 or 10 pounds for whatever reason, and it's probably best to do it slowly and just be in a slight deficits. And for those of you that are focused on improving body composition maximally, like fat loss alone isn't your main goal, you also want to build muscle and improve body composition, then I'd recommend being in a slow deficit, because you're not reducing your calories so much to where your exercise performance and recovery from the gym is suffering. Okay, because obviously performance in the gym is really important. And the less you eat, the harder it is to recover and perform well in the gym. So being in a slight deficit is beneficial for body recomp and building muscle. We can also go into a moderate calorie deficit. That would be roughly 15 to 20% below maintenance. So we would be talking about 24 to 2550 here, 2400 to 2550 calories if my maintenance was 3000 calories per day. I would recommend this for people who are perhaps a little bit more experienced. So again, if you have some of those foundational habits in place, you eat pretty healthy, you focus on your protein, you sleep well, you're active throughout the day, you have a pretty sustainable approach to your nutrition and your lifestyle, you train regularly, then it probably makes sense to be in a slightly greater deficit than just a slow deficit or a small deficit, because you can lose weight at a slightly faster rate. You don't have to be dieting for really long, right? Obviously, if you're at 15 to 20% below maintenance, you're going to lose weight a bit quicker than if you were at 10 to 15% below maintenance. And lastly, you can be in a large deficit of 20 to 25% below maintenance. Again, if my maintenance is 3000 calories, this would be roughly 2250 to 2400 calories per day, which would be pretty low, right? If you're dropping your calories 25%, you're probably going to be relatively hungry. I would only recommend this for people who are experienced dieters who are trying to lose weight within a specific period of time. Maybe they're going on a mini cut, want to lose 4 or 5 pounds of body fat that they've gained while being in a surplus, gaining muscle, etc. Right? I would highly, highly encourage you to avoid going into a large deficit if you are a beginner, or if you are somebody who cares about your performance in the gym, because a large deficit is not sustainable long term. And if you guys have been following my content, you know that everything I talk about is losing fat, building muscle for health and sustainability. You want to be able to do this long term. You don't want to just lose the weight and then it not be sustainable because you just regain the weight because you never really learned how to improve the quality of your diet in a way that you can maintain long term. So if you're relatively new to this whole weight loss stuff, I would not encourage you to try to follow a large deficit and slash your calories by 20 to 25%. Start with a small deficit of 10 to 15% and adjust from there accordingly. Okay, we've been talking a lot about calories, but we also need to discuss how to allocate your calories toward your macros, right? Protein, carbs, fats. If you guys are new to this channel and you are just learning about calories, the macros and the calories are essentially one and the same, because 1 gram of protein has 4 calories, 1 gram of carbohydrate has 4 calories, and 1 gram of fat has 9 calories. So if you are tracking your macros, by default, you are tracking your calories and vice versa. Okay. The main thing I would focus on, guys, is just your total calories and your total protein intake. I would encourage you to really focus on consuming at least 0.8 grams of protein per pound of ideal body weight. Okay. What does that mean? Let's say I weigh 200 pounds and I want to lose 50 pounds of body fat. So I want to be 150 pounds. That's the weight that I would feel comfortable at. Well, I would take 150, multiply it by 0.8, which gives me roughly 120 grams. And I would aim for at least 120 grams of protein every single day. And then if you can go beyond that and get 1 gram or maybe even 1.2 grams per pound of ideal body weight, that would be optimal. Now, as far as your carbs and fats, You do not have to worry about hitting a specific target for your carbs and fats. Meaning that if you're focusing on your total calories and your protein intake, you don't also have to set a specific target or number of grams for your carbs and a specific number of grams for your fats. This becomes extremely difficult to manage, and then you're playing Tetris at the end of the day when you have 10 grams of fat left and 3 grams of carbs. Why do I say it doesn't matter? Because the research unequivocally shows that if you consume adequate protein and you control for your calories, if your carbs are a little bit higher and your fats are a little bit lower, or vice versa, your fats are a little bit higher and your carbs are a little bit lower, it does not differentially affect fat loss at all. You will have the same exact results. Unless you're going extremely to either end of the spectrum here, where you're consuming like the rest of your calories only from carbs and no fats. That would not be good, because we need a certain number of fats in our diet for optimal physiological function. I wouldn't recommend going below 15 to 20% of total calories from fats. And the opposite is also true. If you cut out all carbs and you're just consuming all fat, well, that's not beneficial either, because carbs are important for performance and a number of physiological functions as well. So as long as you're not completely eliminating one or the other, it really doesn't matter. And I would encourage you to let your personal preferences dictate where your carbs and fats fall, because that way you actually enjoy the way that you eat, right? If you naturally like a higher carb diet, that's perfectly fine as long as you're getting protein and accounting for your calories. And if you naturally like higher fat foods, that is also fine if you're controlling for protein and calories. Now, one caveat here that I would share is that if you struggle with hunger, I would encourage you to focus on higher carb foods. Whole foods here, right? Fruits, veggies, beans, whole grains, because these foods that are naturally higher in carbs tend to also be more satiating. You get more food or you get less calories for more food, I should say, right? Because again, the energy density is important here. 1 gram of carbohydrates only has 4 calories. 1 gram of fat has 9 calories. So you get less food for more calories when you're consuming more fats. Next, let's talk about how to track your progress and modify your calories over time, because we need to make sure that we're making progress towards our weight loss goals if you're working towards weight loss here. And we need to learn how to modify our caloric intake if we're not making progress. So the first concept I want to introduce you to is the concept of tracking daily, but adjusting weekly. What does this mean? I want you to track your metrics daily. Okay, you should be weighing yourself daily. You should be tracking your calories daily. However, I don't want you to make any adjustments based off of the daily fluctuations. There are days where your calories are going to be a little bit higher. There are days where your calories are going to be a little bit lower. That's normal. There are days where your body weight's going to be a little bit higher, and there are days that your body weight's going to be a little bit lower. That's completely normal. Fluctuations in body weight are not indicative of fat loss or fat gain. For example, I could do everything right and wake up a little bit heavier tomorrow. Maybe because I had a little bit of extra sodium, so I'm retaining more water. Maybe because I ate more fiber, so I slowed down my digestion, so I have food in my intestines. Your weight can go up from day to day for a number of reasons. That's why I say you should track daily, but adjust weekly. Meaning that you want to have the daily data to be able to look at weekly averages. This is where the magic happens. Look at your caloric intake for the week, average it out, and look at your body weight for the week and average it out. And those things should be moving in the right direction. Okay. So for example, let's say I'm working on weight loss and I weigh myself every day for a week and I take the average and I'm 220 pounds average for the week. One day it might have been 220.6. One day it might have been 219. One day it might have been 221. You get the point. The average is 220. And I have a rate of weight loss that I'm trying to target. Let's say I'm trying to lose 1 pound per week. And I would encourage you guys to set a target of losing 1 to 2 pounds per week max. Okay. No more than that. Well, now you have standards and you have data to adjust your plan based off whether or not your progress is happening at the rate that you're expecting it to happen, right? So let's say I weigh myself week 1, all 7 days, my average body weight is 220 pounds and I'm trying to lose 1 pound per week. So that means that my average for the second week should be at 219 or so. And let's say I weigh myself the second week and my average body weight is not 219. Let's say it's still like 220. I highly encourage you not to make any changes based off of just 1 week either, because things can happen, right? Like your body weight might be artificially inflated for whatever particular reason that week. I would encourage you to only make a change if you're not seeing progress for 2 consecutive weeks. So let's say week 2, I weigh myself and my average body weight is still 220, or maybe it's come down a little bit to 219.5, and then I weigh myself week 3 and my body weight is still like 219.2. Well, I'm slowly losing weight, just not at the rate that I would expect it to. This would be when you want to adjust your caloric intake. And since I want to lose weight at a slightly faster rate, I would slightly decrease my calories, right? By maybe 100 to 200 calories. So if I was tracking my calories in addition to tracking my weight, and my average caloric intake for those 3 weeks was about 2,500, well, I might drop my calories to about 2,300 to speed up the rate of weight loss. The opposite is also true. If you're losing weight really quickly, I would encourage you to increase your calories, because you also don't want to be losing weight so fast that, again, it's impacting your ability to perform in the gym. You're feeling really hungry. It's hard to sustain because those things are not good. Okay, now that you understand how to adjust your calories based off of how you're progressing from week to week, let's talk about practical strategies for long-term success. The first thing I want to talk about is the importance of focusing on your food choices. Tracking calories is not an excuse to eat like shit, okay? Your food choices still matter a ton. And I bring this up because sometimes people think, oh, I'm tracking my calories, I can just eat whatever I want. And theoretically, yes, you can eat whatever you want and lose weight as long as you're accounting for your calories, getting your protein in. But it will be a lot harder if you're eating or following an unhealthy diet. Because if you're eating a ton of processed foods, chocolate, chips, etc., you're not going to feel satiated. You're going to feel really hungry throughout the day, because highly processed foods are very hyperpalatable, meaning that they taste really good, they're very calorically dense, they don't really keep you full, and it's going to be hard to stick to a low-calorie diet. So it's still important to focus on your food choices, things like protein, fiber, whole foods. I have an episode on the podcast literally dedicated to where I talk about specific food choices to help you regulate hunger and satiety. If that's something you struggle with, I encourage you to go check that out. So definitely still focus on having a healthy diet alongside tracking calories. And again, this also contributes to the sustainability piece, right? Because you want to develop the habits of a healthy diet alongside learning how to track calories and being in a deficit, because you don't want to track calories long-term for the rest of your life. If your goal is to come off of calorie tracking, well, then you have to develop a healthy diet alongside that so you can maintain your results long-term without tracking. The next thing that I want to talk about, which I've brought up a couple of times, is do not try to lose weight as quickly as possible. Okay? You may have the willpower to do it. You may have the willpower to starve yourself for a couple of months, but it will not be sustainable. You will not be able to starve yourself for the rest of your life. And the issue is that most people never think about the diet after the diet. I love this phrase because people only think about going on a diet for a certain period of time. And it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do after you're done dieting? And nobody ever thinks about that. And that's the part that's really important to be able to maintain your weight loss, because your goal isn't to lose 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds, however much weight you want to lose. Your goal is to lose that weight and keep it off, right? And if the goal is to keep it off, well, then you have to think about the diet after the diet. And ideally, you do things in a way that's sustainable so you don't have to make drastic changes after you achieve your weight loss goal. You can just keep doing the same thing you've been doing because you did it in a way that feels sustainable and not restrictive. And one of the main factors that contributes to the sustainability is simply not losing weight as quickly as possible, doing it in a slow and sustained fashion. And that's why I mentioned earlier that for complete beginners, I recommend being in a small deficit of 10 to 15% below maintenance and being okay with a slower rate of progress, because it's more sustainable long term. And lastly, I want to talk about the importance of being flexible. You do not have to be perfect with this, guys. In fact, you shouldn't be perfect. There should be flexibility. You're gonna deviate from your calories every once in a while. You're gonna go out to a birthday party or go out on vacation, and you're gonna eat more calories than your plan says you should. That is perfectly fine. Do not stress yourself out about it. Do not let it affect you mentally. Don't let it make you think that you have to starve yourself the day after to make up for it. It's normal. Flexibility is important. There's no need for perfection or obsession. And in fact, being obsessed with perfection actually reduces your likelihood of losing weight and keeping it off. And there's really good research to show that people who think really dichotomously around nutrition, dichotomously meaning black or white, I'm either on plan 100% of the time or I'm not at all, I have to be perfect, that sort of mindset results in poor weight loss outcomes. So people actually don't lose as much weight compared to people who have a more flexible approach and are okay with deviating every once in a while. And it also results in an increase of eating disorders, which is not good. Sometimes when we're focusing on this whole health and fitness thing, we prioritize our quote unquote physical health so much that we let our mental health go to shit. And that's not good, because our mental health is obviously equally as important as our physical health. All right, guys, let's go ahead and wrap this up. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a second to rate and review the podcast. Share it with a friend. If you're on YouTube, comment and subscribe. It helps me a ton, and it really motivates me to make more educational content like this. And by the way, if you're somebody who's actively trying to lose body fat, build muscle, and improve your body composition, I would encourage you to join our 21-day Lean and Strong Challenge at Fit for Life Academy. We run these challenges every couple of months. They're an awesome way to kickstart your health and fitness journey in a healthy and sustainable fashion, so you don't ever have to go on a diet again or feel like you have to start over. I will be transparent with you. You're not going to lose a crazy amount of weight or become Superman in just 3 weeks, but it is a great way to start your fitness journey on the right path. If that sounds like something that's interesting to you, head over to fitforlifeacademy.health/challenge. The link will be down in the description of this episode.